Hello, I am Jon Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And we're going to talk about Eli Sagan. Eli Sagan was an American sociologist, and as somebody who has occasionally said rude things about sociologists, I'd like to point out that there are some that I like and admire. Stephen Kent, for example, a good bloke. Eli Sagan has influenced my thinking for a very long time. I read At the Dawn of Tyranny almost 40 years ago, 30-something years ago. And it tremendously influenced me to this thought that he traced back the origins of kingship, the early kingships, which he felt was a period that had not been really properly considered by social scientists. And he found that almost every society around the world, the development was through a chieftain who would be, quite often a warlord, somebody who wanted to extend territory. And that these earlier groups of humans quite possibly functioned in the same way that chimp packs function. So if two chimp packs meet, the males will sit in one group will set about killing all of the males, including the juvenile and infant males in the other group, and then absorb the females in. We know about the Yamnaya.
Yeah.
Came through Europe between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago. And genetically, we know that the male lines of the tribes they met were annihilated.
The invasion of Melos by the Greeks, where they just decided to kill off all the males. Very frequent thing.
It's a bit unfair calling them Greeks. They were Athenians. Don't blame all. Don't blame.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It was the so-called.
In fact, the Melos people were Greeks, right? So.
Yeah, they too were Greeks, and so it's called the Attic Society, not because they lived in lofts, but because they lived in Athens. Apparently,
it's weird.
It is weird. So that kind of primal urge can and does exist. And what Sagan put forward was that from Sumeria in 3,500 BC, society is distributed throughout the world, and it arises relatively naturally in human groups. He studied Buganda, which is modern Uganda, Hawaii, where the traditions had been overthrown shortly before Westerners arrived. And so they could talk openly about such things as taboos, which is a Hawaiian word for a piece of ground that if you step on it, you have to be killed. And the king of Hawaii had decided they weren't going to do this anymore because it was silly. Would that there were, more such enlightened people around, because people are still doing a lot of very silly things, as far as I can see. And he looked at the Homeric legends, the Trojan Wars, which it appears actually did happen. It was long thought they were simply stories, but the evidence is pretty good now, including a contemporary letter, which I think came from the Hittite archives, which names Agamemnon and Menelaus. So that's pretty groovy. But he looks at the way their societies formed, and he points out certain things. For example, there would be, in the warrior class, homosexuality would be fairly usual, as it was for Alexander the Great, for example, as it was throughout the Greek, Spartan, Athenian societies. And he shows a sort of development that goes forward, but it fixes on this notion of there is a divinity, and the divinity gives authority to a king or a president in more recent times. And we have this strange relationship with these beings. They're meant to be able to touch us and cure us of scrofula, which I haven't got anyway. The king's disease, it was called in this country. They're meant to have superpowers, and they are adulated. Looking at if you look at footage of the Nuremberg rallies, for example, you see this bizarre fervour towards this little Austrian guy who loved to make gestures and have himself photographed doing it, which could be considered a bit narcissistic, really. We have this tendency to do this, but what Sagan pointed out, Eli Sagan, is that it doesn't have to be this way. And he found two societies. Well, he probably didn't find them. Somebody probably found them before him and said, hey, they're over there. One of them is the Aka Pygmy from the west coast of Africa, and they don't have tribal leaders. They don't have chieftains. Somebody who knows how to do something will be in charge when they're doing it. So a particular thing that they're very good at is they like honey. And who doesn't? Well, I suppose vegans don't really. So
those that are good at eating honey get them.
Those who are good at eating honey get to be in charge of the eating of the honey. Those who are best at climbing the trees, because the hives can be pretty high up, apparently, lead the group in doing that. So you have this idea that expertise gives authority, as opposed to I will thump you if you don't do as I tell you, giving you authority, which is the foundation of Western society. He also found the Saan, who are somewhat insultingly, I think, called the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Now, they don't come from the Kalahari. They were driven there, I think, in the 19th century. It's that recent. But they, too, haven't adopted a chiefdom, so they don't have a tyrannical system. And all of the work that we've been doing goes towards this, to say authoritarianism, where somebody gets to say do it or else, is not a good way to live. That human beings have lived under tyranny and in authoritarian systems, and with a tremendous affection for narcissists and psychopaths who have frequently been, liars, cheats, frauds, charmers. There just seems to be this, it'll probably make a good prime minister, though. What are the oranges of this thought?
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah, I was bound to say that at some point. We've got to look at the oranges to find out where they came from. So, sort of thinking towards, Sagan then went on to write The Honey and the Hemlock, which is about the Attic or Athenian democracy and the various genocides. Melos was not the only one. They performed. And so he compares that to the founding fathers and democracy they created. And he says, well, women didn't have rights. In fact, in Athens, they'd be veiled. It would seem that the contemporary Muslim custom of veiling, which I don't believe has any origin in the Quran or in the Midrash, that
debt slavery?
Debt slavery is... See, halfway into this thought, we'll go, debt slavery. That was perfectly typical among the founding fathers.
That's nice. Founding fathers. Sorry, I thought we were talking about...
We were talking about a comparison between Athens and the founding fathers.
Yeah, of course.
So he pointed out that women didn't have rights, either in the Constitution of the United States, nor in Athens, where they would wear the veil, which they passed apparently to the Jews, who passed it in turn with many other customs to early Muslims. The idea was that women would be kept in purdah, as it's called in India. They'd be kept sequestered from the rest of people, so they're a bit worse than the American founders in that. Also, they kept slaves, as did the founding fathers. All men are created equal, except for those who don't happen to belong to our tribe or have our skin colour. He makes that comparison. Then he wrote a book called Citizens and Cannibals, which is about the French Revolution. And his question is, can we actually have democracy? And I think that is, we don't have democracy. We have what Lord Hailsham, who was a former Conservative politician, a barrister, a lawyer called Quentin Hogg, who became Lord Hailsham. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer in a Conservative government. He is considered to be a right-wing politician. Nonetheless, he put forward the idea that we live in elective dictatorships.
Mm.
So every 4 or 5 years, depending on where you live, you elect a new dictator. And within the democratic process, the notion of Congress was meant to restrain the potential tyranny of the president. And unfortunately, they've given away the right to declare war. Now, if you want to stop tyranny, you need to have a bunch of people who sit and make decisions about things, preferably well-informed people. So this is just a little rant about tyranny. Is there anything within that you wanted to, any little thread you wanted to pull out?
Did Sagan arrive at the same conclusion about democracy?
The same conclusion as what?
As you, that we can have it, but we don't have it yet.
I think that as he dedicated his life to trying to understand why we don't have it, that yes, that I'm hopeful that we are gradually working towards equality. That's equality of opportunity, equality of rights. I see the great barrier to that throughout the centuries as plutocracy, the rule of the rich, which is what the Senate was in Rome, and I fear is what's happened to government in the United States, that because of the war against socialism, that became, in the 1930s and 40s, against communism, that became a war really against the worker and against the rights of workers, and therefore a war against democracy.
Yeah.
It was fought by the National Association of Manufacturers, along with the group that is now called the Family, the International Christian League, as it was Vereida's little group. And they ganged together basically to stop democracy and to retain the rule of the plutocrats.
Yeah.
And American history through the 20th century is very much against this war between the plutocrats, which is to say the super rich, and those who believe in democracy. So Teddy Roosevelt, who he was vice president, who became president when President McKinley was shot, and then he was voted in as president. One of his central themes was what was called trust busting, which was trying to stop these families from passing their wealth down, and it failed completely. You have the Guggenheim Foundation, the Ford Foundation, this foundation, the other foundation, all of whom are able to pass on vast fortunes, meaning that they have way too much political influence.
Was it Bernie? Oh, no.
Bernie Sanders,
No,
Barack Obama, one of those people.
I'm thinking of one of the nice, super rich billionaires who said that he didn't feel he had to run for president of the US because he already had the power of a president, basically.
It was Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, yeah.
And I'm not sure how nice he is. I've never met him.
That's true. Yeah.
It's difficult. I mean, we now have people of such power. George Soros is another. Michael Bloomberg, who's running for president. Donald Trump. Tremendously rich people who are in powerful situations, who are backed by political parties that have to raise billions of dollars to run political campaigns. And that, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist, but if you're to have democracy, then you have to have voting rights. Barack Obama's first act when he became president was to extend the period of time after you'd left government service before you could become a lobbyist working for the rich to get things done. But there needs to be a shift in power. I think in Europe, we're generally in a better situation, but we are shifting towards populist parties, as in Austria and Hungary, Marine Le Pen in France. Modi in India. They're not part of Europe.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. President Xi in China, quite obviously.
Yeah.
Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, that these are truly dangerous people. But for the most part in Europe, there is something less plutocratic because we do have labour unions that do have some say and can fund political parties. And I think things have gone very, very badly wrong. It should be that free TV time, free internet time could be given to anybody, and it is. And people like us can make YouTube. So vote for us.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation. I'm Jon
I'm
Atack.
Sam Atack.
Thank you so much.